Christ is risen at a difficult hour for everyone. First of all, let me admit that I find myself among so many canonologists. It's not so scary as I thought. A professor of mine used to say, a theologian of the ecumenical movement will also find his place among experts. So I consoled myself, and I thought that I'm increasing the variety among theologians, canon experts, and so on. So I was invited to discuss the following issue, and that's why I studied canons: the relation between canons and the environment. I will try to showcase the relation between these two. Under environment, I will discuss the creation in general and man in particular. In the second part of my introduction, which, well, I don't know if I will have time to read that, I will discuss the modern ecological crisis as a consequence of the fall of man, the dependence of the human face, and his detachment from God has resulted in the independence of the creation. That is, the creation follows man even in his fall. So, what are the relations? The relation between canons and the so-called ecological crisis, where the ecological crisis is a consequence of the anthropological crisis. I must admit I didn't find in the canons any direct ad hoc reference, an explicit reference to the ecological crisis in the sense that we mean it today. And this is easily understood in the sense that such reference cannot have existed, since the problem did not exist at the times of the proceedings of apostolic and post-apostolic fathers. Nor would it be proper to use ex post various excerpts from older texts to be interpreted ad libitum in relation with the current, the modern conjuncture from a political, economic, and cultural point of view. So what we need, therefore, is contextual theology. So the Church is called upon to interpret the canonical texts. In this we need to know the context. After this brief introduction, I will go to the first chapter. But before that, let me say that I was impressed by the following. Actually, when I read the specific canon, I dedicated a few minutes thinking how much it would help us to develop inter-Christian dialogue if this spirit of the third canon of the Queen Sexta had prevailed. Quotation.
Ως μήτε το πράον έκλητο, μήτε στιφών το αυστηρόν καταλήψιμεν. Φανερώνει αυτός ο κανόνας.
This canon is the fatherly and lenient and loving behavior that priests and the laity are called upon to adopt in order to avoid both excessive leniency and rigid strictness on the other hand. So I will discuss the integrity of the human face in connection with the environment. In the Eucharistic man, there's no distinction between the natural and the supernatural, between the visible and invisible, since we are in the liturgical time. Therefore, the human nature is perceived undivided. But for man to function as an agent of peace on earth, he needs to respect his creator and the integrity of nature. the fallen man, actually, the man who insists to fall despite the resurrection, is alienated, and this alienation results in his detachment from the Creator, but from his very nature and the nature of the creation. So man is called upon to respect his relation with God and the Church without rejecting himself. So one body of man becomes many, and many becomes one through the Eucharistic reference and the Christological transformation in the Holy Ghost. In other words, according to our canons, the collective includes the individual, leading to an anthropology where man is not perceived as a problematic man. So in this course to perfection, man is not complete if he self-mutilates his nature. In this wider interpretation framework, man is called upon to respect his own nature, his very nature, and is invited not to self-mutilate, to contain his passion, because he's murdering himself. He's the enemy of divine creation. If someone has lost his masculinity because of hostile action or during war, he can be ordained as a bishop even when mutilated, according to Apostolic Canons 21, 22, 23, and 24. If a layman self-mutilates himself, he will be aphorized for 3 years. The same is proposed in the first canon of the First Ecumenical Council. We must also respect our neighbor, not out of courtesy, because in his person we meet Christ. In addition, if the neighbor has lost for any reason his physical integrity, he deserves even more so our care and our pastoral interest. And I can say that if a clergyman ridicules someone because he's lame or blind or deaf, then he should be aphorized. And the same goes for laymen, for the laity. Another example showcasing the concept of the man as image of God is the Canon 59. When a bishop or presbyter does not help a poor clergyman, he should be aphorized, because this is tantamount to killing your brother. So those who do not help with in a material way their neighbor, they are condemned in the ecclesiastical conscience as murderers, as assassins. So you can imagine what the Church should think as a global community on the problem of malnutrition affecting a large part of the population of our planet. The same applies to women who commit abortion or produce medicines which kill embryos. The Church is very strict here, as we all know, for pedagogical reasons. We prohibit women which commit these acts to partake of the communion until the end of their life. Canon 24 of the Ankara Council. The penance of assassin is also imposed to those who produce these and administer these medicines. So very quickly, we should try to see how many elements our religion takes into account from the wealth of our canons in order to deal with the environmental problem. Through these examples in various canons, we can see to what extent sacred canons can contribute to the development of the Christian anthropology. We witness, therefore, the ontology deriving from the spirit of the canons, which relate to not to the appearance, but to the being of man. This is the spirit of the 12th canon, according to which if someone wears poor clothes for show and accuse those who are dressed in silk, he should be anathematized. So the sacred canons decry the appearance and are interested in the substance. I have two examples here that I will read later concerning piousness, real piousness and pseudo-piousness. Sacred canons, integrity of the environment and animals. In the patristic teaching, man perceives the world through God. In this procedure, the sacrifice uses materials that are meant for this specific purpose. We can only use wine and wheat and not honey, milk, or other alcoholic beverages or other fruit, as other confessions do. Those who offer something else apart from wine and bread should lose his office. In this partaking of his grace, only bread and wine can participate and are transformed through the priest officiating, and oil becomes unction. So the man produces these gifts, carrying with him his weaknesses and virtues and his entire relation with the natural world through the bread, the wine and oil. So the link is the partaking of man in the triadic God. This is what all holy canons profess. They do not impose, but they accept and they witness the ecclesiastical experience. The independence of man from the economy of God is the result of free decision and judgment that was offered to man from God. This is a given. The mystery of man is perfectioned according to the model of Christ. This is another given. In this transformation procedure, love of man to his neighbor is linked inextricably with the love of man to the creation. And this is not a moralistic norm, but the result of the existentialist ontological relation between the nature of man and the godly nature. By the way, man cannot be saved by any piousness, but a Eucharistic realism. Criterion of the patristic literature and the canonical tradition is the definition of the proper use of the environment by man. This is a key point, the proper or due use of the environment by man. That's why we are obliged to use things feeling that God supervises our actions. Canon 38. Every time we forget that the Lord offered to us the earth and the universe, then we tend to abuse nature and the environment. Because of this arrogance, we are led to an impasse. It is interesting also to see the relation of man with animals. In Canon 51 of the Penthecti, that those who attend fighting between animals should be aphorized. Men cannot enjoy the abuse of animals. Man, in various texts, is the temple and the body of the Christ. He partakes of the Holy Grace, Canon 101 of the Quinisext. So men cannot indulge in such views. As the head of the creation, the pinnacle of the creation, man should protect the creation and not abuse it for self-indulgence. In this context, we have Canon 61 of the Quinisext, which imposed the penance of excommunication for 6 years to those who participate in torture of animals. Actually, Canons 16 and 17 of the Ankara Council condemn those who have sexual relations with animals, and these are condemned for 15 years if this happened before the 20th year of their age, while when this has happened at the age above 50, then only upon death or just before death they can partake of the Holy Communion. The sin is even more important when these Christians have caused the death of the animals in this respect. That's why the Holy Synod obliges them to pray together with the demonized. At this point, let me say once again that the Church does not attempt through the holy canons, the sacred canons, to impose on the human society, especially the modern, postmodern society, specific rules of behavior, but it attempts to present holy society showing the taste of the holy experience in which they have a specific role. Another canon, an interesting one, showing the importance of the canonical tradition, is Canon 88 of the Quinisext, which explicitly refers that no one can allow an animal in the temple. However, and this is another proof of economy, if someone is walking and his life depends on the animal, on his animal, then he's allowed to enter in the temple in order to protect it, and then he can continue his course. But if the need is not such and the animal enters the temple, the clergy loses his office, and if it's a layman, he's aphorized. You see here the wisdom and the divine inspiration of those who drafted the canon. So the Church dilates or restricts the boundaries of definitions in holy canons in order to safeguard the salvation of human souls. And this is my last chapter, Sacred Canons, Anthropological and Ecological Crisis, to have or to be. The ecological crisis is probably the most acute and complex problem of the 21st century. It is a situation that threatens the existence of man and the natural environment in which humanity lives, acts, produces, plans, officiates, and shares the creation. This is the result of the failure of man to control his own needs. Ecology describes precisely the rupture of the relation between man and the environment. That is why these days we discuss the terms economic and ecological debt. His Eminence of Pergamos Ioannis says the indifference of the Church for the natural world in the name of the ostensibly exclusively spiritual existence is not acceptable anymore. It is even dangerous. The Church should adopt a more ecological approach. Because of the complexity of the problem, it is very difficult to implement a solution. The applicable economic and cultural environment shows that the results are non-reversible and probably constitute a huge threat for man and the environment. If we stop equating progress with the accumulation of material goods, then we might be able to implement the eschatological vision of man. Otherwise, for as long as our states continue to divide themselves in rich and poor, in strong and weak, lenders and borrowers. And as long as our progress depends on the poverty of others, then this will be a lose-lose situation. The fall will be certain, and the condemnation from God also certain. A rich society, wrongful before God, is not a fair society, is not a just society. The Bishop of Albania says that the Church cannot become a member, cannot be a member of the rich club. The Church should take a stance and insist against any insensitivity before the human suffering. In this stance, a new pastoral analysis could greatly contribute, in addition to the traditional canons. And let me also add some questions. What is growth at the end of the day? What is prosperity for human society? Are there limits to the development of science, and who will set them? And what is the role of the Church in changing this situation? What is the role of the canonical tradition in a growing, changing world? Conclusion: we need a new ecumenical spirituality incarnated in the here and now, with Eucharist in the center, which will be a sharing culture open to everyone, with three main characteristics: opening up ourselves to the Holy Spirit and the neighbor, connecting to the community through mutual cooperation and recognition and unity in everyday life close to the earth. The ecological crisis is not something external or superficial, as we tend to believe, or something that we will encounter in the remote future. It is our very identity. It is the being of modern man. Modern Superman even tries to emulate life in the lab by using biotechnology means and methods, ignoring the substrate, trying to shape and create his own world, ignoring the Church and its teaching. So man is transgressing the limits of his own creation by playing with the genome. This position does not mean that there is any opposition between science and religion. However, there must be some terms and conditions in this respect. We should set limits to our activities, and then we need the ethos of science, not in the form of imposing some moral or canonical rules, but in the form of proposals for life, something that sacred canons through their pastoral dimension can succeed. And let me conclude with some canons that are linked to what I just said, and I will conclude with that. Canon 44 and Canon 17 and 10, that the bishop or the presbyter or the deacon who asks for interest for his debtors should be seized. This is unacceptable by the law of God. It goes against with human and divine justice. So, we have greed, one of the capital sins. It is not allowed for the body of the Church to be servants of God and also servants and slaves of money. So the clergy should lose their office in case they ask for interest. The demon, Mammonas, cannot exert control on the clergy. We cannot tolerate speculation among the body of the Church. This is foreign to the body of the Church. Canon 17 and 15. Another canon stipulates that if you ordain not with ecclesiastical criteria, then if the wrong criteria have been applied, those who have ordained and those who have been ordained will lose their office. Thank you very much.